And welcome back. As you guys can see, I have a very special guest, and that is Logan Mohtashami. Did I get that right, Logan?
Perfect.
Awesome. Yeah, Logan is the lead analyst for HousingWire.com, and he was so grateful to accept my invitation to be on the channel to share his insights regarding the housing market and, of course, a lot of other topics we want to cover in today's video. So welcome, Logan.
It's great to be here.
Awesome. So one thing I want to say straight off the bat is that if there was a award for the best for the best hair in real estate, you, my friend, would win. Hats off.
Yes. My hair has taken a life on its own, and I'm very fortunate because my father and my brother were both balding in their 30s, and my grandfather on my mother's side, he had a full head of hair the day he died. So I obviously took the genes from him.
Yeah. So you're 7 feet with the hair, and then like you're
Yeah.
like 5'10". Yeah. It's awesome. Well, yeah, it's such a pleasure to meet you. This is actually the first time we actually had talked, but we have a mutual connection, which is Jim Black, my dear friend of like 35 years, which we kind of talked about offline. So yeah, thank you for joining us. I know a lot of people get a lot of value because let's just kind of back up. For those who do not know who you are, can you kind of explain who you are and what you do at HousingWire?
Well, I'm the lead analyst for HousingWire. I started working there in 2019. Our family in general has been in banking since the late 1950s. Myself, I was a loan officer from about 2003 to 2020, retired early 2020. I started writing about housing economics in 2010. Kind of one thing led to another. This was all a tragic accident. I started to take the work in a more economic sense, not just housing, around 2015. And I've just became a giant data chart nerd out there. And my role is just to basically talk about economics in the normal format. And I think that's the different thing. I'm not here to kind of economics done right should be very boring. But in my case, my job is to basically relay the academic and economic work in a way that could be somewhat entertaining, but also factual, which in this day and age, it's a pilgrim in an unholy land in that sense.
Well, I have the way I describe myself is a self-proclaimed real estate data nerd, and you're the chart guy. So the combination of us both is kind of like the perfect combination of kind of sharing what's happening in the housing market.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is, and it's been very confusing for a lot of people.
Yeah, it's definitely confusing. I mean, like the volatility over the past several years, we went from record highs to decreases in prices the first time in 13 years. I mean, quite the volatility over the past several years. So having said that, how would you kind of describe the housing market as we're seeing right now? And actually, I'm looking out the window right here. I see a coyote, believe it or not. But yeah, how would you describe the state of the U.S. housing market right now?
Well, the existing home sales market has been in a recession since June 16th, 2022. And when we think of the existing home sales market, it's a sales falling so much, it's a transfer of commissions. It doesn't mean home prices are falling nationally. It just means activity is low. The new home sales market is growing since the lows of 2022. So that's in a normal, healthy spot. But I deem the housing market savagely unhealthy in 2022, was unhealthy in 2021 because active inventory got to a level that none of us have ever seen in history.
Yeah.
So my concern toward the end of 2020 that home prices could actually escalate out of control in this environment, and it did. And then mortgage rates jumped up in a super fast fashion, and it created the fastest crash in sales ever. And this was going to take a while to kind of resolve itself. But 2024, it's a lot healthier now because active inventory is growing. The days on market are growing. We're starting to get something like a normal housing market back again. So I'm very happy about this year. More than, for example, last year. Last year, active inventory didn't really start to grow until the second half of 2023. And we're trying to find an equilibrium between supply and demand. And of course, demand's picked up just a little bit recently, but to me, the housing market really does need sub 6% mortgage rates to grow sales, just like the new home sales market has showed everyone.
Yeah, that's the same thing that I've been sharing on my channel as well, is that I really don't think that we're going to see a rush of home sales unless rates get, below levels we're seeing today. Yeah, maybe perhaps below 5%, because prices still remain really high as well, which kind of leads me to my next question. The most common comment I get on my channel is like, home prices are too high, which I totally understand people saying that. But also, some people believe that the housing market's going to crash worse than 2008. How would you respond to that?
That's kind of been my specialty. A lot of people know me as like the American bear, killer out there running around the internet and challenging people on the recession calls. But housing 2008, and the problem we have in housing economics is that the academic side doesn't do a really good job of explaining housing economics to the public, and the public tends to go to kind of doom porn to get their information. And the housing price crash people are what I deem to be professional grifters, not actual data people. So their forecasting and models aren't very coherent. If you look at the history of home prices going back to 1942, if I took 2007 and 11 out of the equation, home prices only fell 1 year. It was in 1990, and it was only 1%. And it was really tilted because Southern California was in a deeper recession. So the economics of housing does not give you kind of a worse than 2008 backdrop, but it really does sell clicks if you say it does. So I've been trying to keep people at bay as much as I can over the last few years about stay away from 2008 economics, because none of those variables are here. But if we look back to the early 1980s, housing was less affordable back then. We had more inventory. We had less workers. We had a recession, and home prices didn't fall.
It's wild.
So you have a situation to where you can compare this to history, and that is the closest I can refer this to. But however, what happened back then is mortgage rates went 2.5% lower, and home sales back then went from 2 million to 4 million, 4 million down to 2 million. It crashed, and then home sales started to pick up again. And home sales started to pick up with inventory picking up, and prices increased and sales increased, and eventually household formation, wages grow, and you get the housing cycles we've had for 80 years. 2007 and 11 was such a unique backdrop because foreclosures were actually increasing in 2005, 6, 7, and 8, all before the job loss recession happened. The exotic loan debt structures of the loans back then facilitated most sellers or buyers anyway back then was just straight so many distressed sales. We don't have that backdrop anymore. So hopefully that is a very quick way to explain why prices rose in 2023 and prices rose nationally still in 2024. The Case-Shiller just came out and it's another all-time high. So I think for me, it's just trying to explain the supply and demand equilibrium of how it works in relationship to the economy, the bond market, mortgage rates. And it's not the most exciting topic, I get it, but I try to make it as entertaining as possible and to get people to follow people that do forecasting and models and kind of the nerdy people. The record speaks for itself. For the last 13 years, we've always had people that said home prices are going to crash, and we just don't have that we don't have the economic history behind it, but we don't have the same backdrops as we did in 2007 to 11.
Yeah, I think the important takeaway there is like education, right? So I think the people that think that the market's going to crash just like 2008 were probably not homeowners or buyers back then, I'm guessing. Because back then I purchased a home in 2005, and the options really was not a 30-year fix. Really, the option, because everyone was doing it, was an ARM. And I chose a lengthy 7-year ARM instead of a 3-year ARM, 5-year ARM that people were doing. Interest only. So we had those loans back then that someone could just pick a payment. Do you want your payment to be the full amount of your principal and interest, taxes, insurance, et cetera? Or do you want this one, which is a lot less than that one? And by the way, don't worry, because making a payment is actually less than what you actually would owe, but we'll just add that to the balance of your loan. So every time you're making a payment, your loan balance increases because, of course, back then home prices increased forever, right? So it's basically and on top of that, too, the qualification underwriting standards were like, hey, can you breathe into a mirror? And if so, hey, you're qualified.
It's the 2010 qualified mortgage law. I kind of tour the country now and I show all these credit charts. And after 2010, everything changed for housing. So I kind of have a simple model with inventory. 70 to 80% of home sellers are buyers, 20 to 30% inventory gets left over. There is one group of home buyers that do not provide you a house. It's first-time home buyers. Millennials started to buy in 2013. Mortgage demand started to grow in 2014, all the way up. In years 2020 to 2024, it's the biggest housing demographic patch in history. So inventory slowly started to move lower and lower and lower for many years. Nobody paid attention to it. But years 2020 to 2024, that's our best housing demographic patch ever. Well, housing broke out actually before COVID even came out. But inventory hit all-time lows. So if you believe in supply and demand equilibrium economics, you just have an X amount of higher levels of sales, but you have the lowest inventory ever. We have over 336 million people in America now. We have our workforce is so much bigger. That is not a very healthy environment for home prices. Prices escalate. In the late 1970s, actually home prices grew more from 1977 to 1979 than 2020 to 2022. But really? Yeah, and early 1940s as well. The early 1940s was the hottest home price growth period post World War II. But in this context, homeowners are doing great, right? And what I try to do is I try to show people the data that is so different now. Like, for example, 42% of homes in America don't have a mortgage. Yep. But when we're talking about currently, the loan to values in America with the people that have mortgages are under 50%. Back in 2008, it was 80 to 85%. We had 4 years of rising foreclosures and bankruptcies. They didn't happen now. We are the lowest levels ever. We're just not even pre-COVID levels. So now it's just a much different backdrop. And that's not the most exciting topic to talk about because it doesn't show this massive stress. Now, there's parts of the country that inventory is rising. There's parts of the country that has insurance issues. But in general context, most homeowners are doing really good.
Yeah, I think that's an important distinction there. I mean, like the looseness of credit back in 2005 through 2009, right before the Dodd-Frank Act of 2010, was very, very loose. You look at a chart. What is it? I think it's Freddie Mac or the MBA or something. It shows the credit availability is shooting up right before the Great Recession. I think the index was at 900. Now it's at like 90. So basically, it was like 10 times.
Chart, yeah, it's a chart that I use in my conferences. The index was running at 400, and it shot up to 900 by 2005 and 6. So during that period of time, the credit channels were just exploding. We had massive credit boom. And then it went from 900 down to 100. And it's basically been there for 14 years, So it's just, it was such a once in a lifetime event, but it left such a memory to everyone that they think everything is going to be the same like that. And my job, again, is to try to teach history of economics and try to get people in line. And hopefully it could explain 2023 and 2024, as a lot of people thought the big home price crash was going to happen in 2023 and then it had to happen in 2024. And now, demand's slightly picking up. It's just a much different backdrop. A good way to look at this is the NAR has their inventory data. Traditionally, going back 5 decades, it's between 2 to 2.5 million active listings. Well, in 2007, it peaked at 4 million. We're at 1.135 million today. Completely different marketplace as back then. But I think when people visually see the charts that we show at HousingWire, all of a sudden people are like, whoa. And it's a lot of data that not a lot of people has ever seen, the loan to value, the FICO score data, the foreclosure data. Then it all starts to make sense. And I think that's my job. My job is to make everybody kind of make sense of this and take it from there. And then again, it explains our models that we use for housing economics.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think that part of the challenge for everyday consumers is that information is typically not readily available. So for example, like data from NAR, they only look at the past 12 months. If you go to Fred charts, it only goes back 12 months. So in order to get to historical data going back to the 1980s or whatever it is, if you want to have that access to that data, you have to be a realtor if you want it for free. But as a consumer, you have to pay. Guess how much it is?
A lot. And this is why we always say, they call me the chart.
$1,500 for an Excel file. It's like, what? So it's mind blowing. So I can look at that and share the data, which is great because I show how like the month supply back during the Great Recession was like at 12 months, I believe, if my memory serves me correct. And I believe that the month supply is around 4 months today.
Yeah, the average run rate for 2007 to 11 was over 10 months if you accumulate them all together. So it's one of these things where, like I said, my nickname's the chart daddy. So I've got 50,000 charts stored in my computer. It's not just housing, but it's general economics because I follow the economic cycle first, housing second.
Yeah.
And when we overlay the data lines, if I go back 500 years, there's never been a sector that is more different than the 2002 to 2011 housing data versus the 2012 to 2024 housing data. It's so vice versa.
Yeah.
So this is why we have to show the historical data, not just the current recent data. And then people get a better picture. Because I know I talk to realtor associations and mortgage associations across the country. And every time when we're done speaking, everybody just goes, oh my God, I just never knew. And they take their information and they give it to their clients and their clients go, never knew that either. So that's the clarity that us nerds want to provide. But unfortunately, we live in an era where you have to like be a little bit entertaining as well to get the viewership. So we have a top 10 business podcast in America, and it's done in a fun way, but it's also done in a way to where we try to keep it as simple as possible so everyone can relate to it and then talk about to their clients with it.
What's the name of the podcast?
Housing Wire Daily. Sarah Wheeler and myself, we come on every Thursday and Monday out there. And it's a fun way to look at economics weekly, but we also give historical perspective.
That's awesome. Because it's very challenging. I first admit my videos are definitely not entertaining whatsoever. So it's hard to make it entertaining when you're just talking about like data and like percentages and the housing market, whatnot. So hats off to you if you can make it entertaining. So you're doing something right.
Yeah, I mean it's also done in a way that we try to incorporate what's happening during the week so people keep up informed. Now, the way we track housing data, we're like months ahead of the NAR. We have a weekly tracker. We bring it out every weekend. We track the active inventory, new listings data, price cut percentages. We incorporate it to the bond market and mortgage rates and purchase application data. And by the time you or normal consumers read it in the NAR or Case-Shiller's report, we're already 4 months ahead. And this is why we try to teach people that looking at current and forward data actually is more prolific than waiting for the NAR's existing home sales or the Case-Shiller report. And this way,
that's the worst. I
yeah.
Just
can't so we do it in
yesterday, July's numbers. Like, thank you very much for the 3-month average there.
So it's done in a way to keep people informed. So we look ahead. We always want to look like 30 to 90 days ahead, and the current data. We don't want to look backwards. So then this almost gives us an unfair advantage. I always joke about that it's not fair. Like the data that we know, like on Friday night, I'm one of the few people on planet Earth that see the weekly data. And then we present it on the weekend. So again, our job is to teach. And when we teach this, then more people get educated about this. And then kind of the doom porn people kind of are less relevant in that fashion. And my academic nerdy economist friends don't deal with those people as much, but I have no problem challenging all of the live data. So like my thing is like, I want to see your forecasts and models and everything going back 5 years, and none of them can really do it. So I think that's the way that I try to look and approach this, because if I do my job right, everyone understands it better and they can talk to their family members, their clients, or everything. And that's the whole purpose of my work, is to educate and to teach people, how to read economics and say it in a way that their clients and family and friends could understand better.
And that's awesome, because we're definitely aligned in that scenario, because I basically started talking about like the housing market in the US back in like May 2020. I was seeing all these videos about how that market was going to crash because unemployment was at 14%. We have all these what we call it loan forbearances that everyone's doing, which once they get off, they're going to crash the market. We're going to see foreclosures,
They gave
etc.
those people a nickname, the forbearance crash bros. And
There you go. I mean, it's the crash bro. It's like the housing market didn't crash in 2020, 20. And so I made a video back then about looking at the actual data instead of like making a video about how I felt things were going to happen. And back then I was seeing that inventory was just going down. And I made a video how like the inventory was already down before COVID hit. And then we had COVID and then inventory sunk. And so I made a video about how the market was, home prices are still going to be increasing because of all the data I was seeing. That video got pushed out greatly because I'm sure a lot of people are watching videos about how the market was going to crash. Of course, I made a video exactly the opposite of that, but kind of in line here talking about like what's actually happening rather than like, I don't know, fear mongering or like speculating about how the market's going to crash to get clicks, if that makes sense.
It is interesting in the aspect that I've done this for so long that I've kept every forecast for the last 13 years. Like what reason was for home prices to crash starting from 2012? And since I've collected everything, there's one common theme. The people that think home prices are going to crash are usually the people that hate the Federal Reserve. And they usually have like 5 simple sentence structures that they've kept year in and year out. And one thing they don't do is none of them ever forecast, or none of them actually have any models to show this. So I always tell people, if you really wanted to trust a source, look at their forecast, look at their models to see if they could explain it. And the doom crash people just keep on saying crash every single year, but it's year 13 now. So it's like a broken clock. The broken clock has more economic games. So that's kind of how I've decided to challenge this, because in this context, we could actually teach people what's going on. So in the future, they don't have to listen to people, and those people get so much attention. Trust me, they get millions and millions and millions of views, but they're not actually economic or data people. Actually, you could see it by the way they talk. You could see the chart manipulation they do, and really very little forecasting, no actual live models to work with.
Yeah, so I guess like, you know, obviously we've seen like a lack of like years in which home prices are going down, and you know, overall buyers are in, you know, people buying houses or refinancing are in good financial shape, because we're seeing like high FICO scores, for example, which is much different compared to the prior to the Great Recession. But I don't want to paint like a rosy picture ever or either, because you know there's a lot of challenges right now. We have, you know, near record high credit card balances, delinquencies on credit cards going up as well. So, you know, not to say like that everything is like perfect. What do you think is kind of like the biggest challenges in the housing market right now overall?
Credit card delinquencies are mostly from younger households that are renters. Homeowners on paper have actually never looked better. One of the more popular charts I have is the actually homeowner FICO score chart. And we go back 14 years. It has never looked this good ever. And the average FICO scores of purchases recently is like 780, like the top of the food chain. Renters, though, different story. Renters that, you know, just have a high school education, different story. Renters that didn't finish high school, much different story. Unemployment rate is at 7.1% for that. So there's a bifurcated market in that context. Again, the existing home sales to me is still in a recession just because demand is very low. You need demand and credit to grow for housing to get that out of a recession, because it's, again, a transfer of commission. So right now, what I'm looking for in the housing market and the economic cycle is actually residential construction workers. Every recession we've had in recent history, residential construction workers lose their jobs first before every recession. And this has been one of the more confusing periods, because everybody was so sure we're going into recession in 2022. But the builders have been paying down mortgage rates. They've been able to grow sales, and they've been able to keep people employed while they're working through their backlog. So I'm keeping an eye on that more for the economic cycle and the housing cycle, because before rates fell this year, housing starts were at near recession lows. Permits were at near recession lows. Housing construction workers were not growing at all for many, many months. But just recently, because mortgage rates have fallen now almost 1.5%, the builders have been able to pay down rates, grow sales again, and now single family permits are rising for the first time in a few months. That's where I'm keeping my focus on, because actually, if the US goes into recession, housing disproportionately gets hit in a benefit side because rates go lower and stay there for a longer period of time. While here, they're just elevated and can stay elevated for a while.
Yeah. I don't really follow too much the construction jobs. Maybe I should. I know like the NAHB, the National Association of Home Builders, shares data on that, but maybe I should pay closer attention to that.
Yeah, it's actually on Fred. If you go on Fred and type in residential construction workers, it's actually it's a beautiful chart. Every recession, this thing falls. How they always say housing
or during.
It falls right before the recession happens.
Okay. Yeah.
And not a lot of people know that. Construction workers typically lose their jobs first before the recession. So I use that chart to kind of teach economic cycle work and why we haven't had a job loss recession yet. Manufacturing jobs typically lose as well because investment, the cost of debt is too much that people can't invest in projects. We see this in the apartment boom. So in that context, I think that explains the economic cycle, which is a whole different conversation outside of housing. But the builders have been able to pay down rates, grow sales, permits are rising again. So we're not quite there yet on the residential jobs being lost like we saw in 2006 and 7, what we saw before the tech recession, and what we saw before the recession in the early 1990s.
Yeah, I know like new home sales were just announced yesterday, which was on Wednesday, and it showed that sales were more or less in line with pre-COVID levels, like around like 700,000 units, seasonally adjusted, and also analyzed as well. But what really caught my attention though was the amount of new homes, single family houses that were for sale. That again, that could be a dirt lot, home under construction, or a completed unit. And looking at that data, the number of new single family houses were basically the highest level, except for 2 months this year, the highest level since 2008. On top of that, looking at completed houses, over 100,000. That was like a 40% increase compared to a year ago, and the highest level since 2009. Is the high level of inventory for brand new houses, is that a concern for you or not?
So, and this has been the most confusing data line for everyone in America. There's no story there. 102,000 or 102,000 is actually normal. What's happened is that the monthly supply, and this is where it gets very confusing. The monthly supply is a lot of those homes haven't even started yet. And so many of the homes are either under construction or haven't started yet. And it's record breaking in that data line. So when people see the housing charts, with that, they think, oh my God, it's 2008 all over again. It's actually not, because even in 2008, the completed units for sale actually never got to 200,000. The active inventory in America got up to 4 million. So it's not that big. But in this context, everyone sees that and thinks it's 2008. It's a very normal market. The builders are killing it. Their stocks are killing it. Their sales are growing. Their profit margins are very good. And that's the difference, in that context. We haven't had the profit margins really go down to where they need to fire people or not be able to pay down rates. So I always tell people 102,000 completed units for sale is historically low. That is out of 146 million total units. It's a tiny sliver. The builders are still able to sell their homes. And as long as single family permits are rising and new home sales rising, that actually looks perfectly normal. And that hopefully explains why the builder stocks have done really well. And a lot of that is actually not the top builders. These are smaller builders where they see their inventory increasing. So it's a very small portion of the pie, especially when you adjust it to the population. Active inventory really comes from the existing home sales market, not from the new home sales market, just because those homes go into contract. And by the time the house is built, somebody comes and occupies them. Smaller builders do not have the profit margins as bigger builders do. The bigger builders' monthly supply is so much lower than smaller builders. So that actually looks perfectly normal in context to where we are. And hopefully that explains why the majority of all inventory actually comes from the existing home sales market, which is just a bigger pool, a bigger stock of homes. if you look at that, the 2008 crisis, only less than 200,000 available units. We had 4 million active listings in 2007. Mostly comes from distress inventory back then. Here, it's just very small. So that's why I always like to tell people about the active inventory. The historical average is between 2 to 2.5 million. This is nothing. It's never going to be a big story because the builders don't really supply that many homes to the market going back decades. Whenever they see demand get slower, they stop their permits, right? And they slow things down. And this is why recently permits were at recession levels, starts were at recession levels. The builder's business model is not to oversupply a marketplace. They're kind of like OPEC. When they see demand start to get weaker, they stop produce, like OPEC stop produces oil. They stop the production, and majority of the inventory is still under construction or hasn't started yet. In fact, we have more homes that hasn't even started yet. It's only 102,000, but that's actually a historical high level. So it's probably been one of the more confusing things in the last few years, but it's something I constantly talk about so people could have an idea that that data line doesn't really mean that much in the general housing market. It does show that smaller builders have had a problem not being able to pay down rates. The bigger home builders just have gross profit margins are over 20%. They just pay down rates, sell the products. Their monthly supply is so much lower. So that's really more of a smaller builder story than anything in the general housing market.
So you're saying that because the inventory and sales for brand new construction is kind of like a small sliver of like the resale market, this doesn't affect the market as a whole, you're saying?
Yeah, it doesn't really impact anything in the general majority. Almost 90% of all inventory going back decades comes from the existing home sales market. Just to give you a good example, we have a new listings data that comes out every week. 2 weeks of our new listings data from the existing home sales market is more homes than the builders can provide in 1 year. That's how big the existing home sales market is compared to the builders. Builders just don't.
New listings you're talking about?
Yeah, the new listings for the existing home sales market. Just 2 weeks of new listings is more than all the total homes available for sale from the builders going back 14 years, or even going back even 16, 17 years. So it's confusing because they see the monthly supply is very high, but when you break it down, majority of all monthly suppliers are homes either under construction or haven't even started yet. And that's why you don't have a lot of total completed units for sale from the builders in the last few years. And even like 80 to 120,000 is normal in that environment. And that's kind of how the builders operate, because people see the builder stocks and they go, oh my God, they're killing it. But they don't see these big home sales like they did during 2008. Their profit margins are higher and better, and they're just taking advantage of the marketplace because the existing home sales market hasn't had a lot of inventory, and their home buyers don't have sub 6% mortgage rates. So the builders are kind of just using that little, hey, listen, everyone come and buy our brand new house. We have sub 6% mortgage rates. Come, you don't need to buy an older home. So they've milked that as much as they can, which is better for the economy in the sense that we keep construction jobs going and build more homes. But as we've seen, housing starts and permits have been at near recession lows recently. But now that rates have fallen, builders' confidence is picking up again, and they're starting single-family permits growing. Single-family permits growing is a very positive for the U.S. economy.
Yeah, but I mean, overall, builders are pessimistic, though. I mean, based on that survey from the NHAB, I think it's
it's actually it's historically low, but as long as the forward-looking data grows in that, it's positive in every single cycle post World War II. And
if it improves,
the forward-looking data, it's a subcomponent of it, and this is tilted to the smaller builders, not the big publicly traded builders. The big
I didn't know that. So like the survey that like the census does, is it? I know it's based on a survey, but you're saying that survey is basically sent to like small builders and not like publicly traded.
Majority of it. That's another thing that not a lot of people know.
Why is that? They see like the main builders, like the vast majority of the home sales and inventory, right? So why would
they see it's majority? Majority smaller builders, not the big publicly traded builders. And that's another confusing thing. They see the builders' confidence low, and they go, "How's Toll Brothers stock doing great?" I said, "Oh no, that survey doesn't have those stock companies in them. They're more smaller builders." So when that survey starts to pick up, it's like, okay. It's already on already, because the bigger builders have more money to work with. So the last 3 months, the builder survey has actually picked up, looking out a few months. So it's been a very positive data line the last 3 months. And for the first time in many months, the single family permits are rising again. We haven't had that happen all year.
Yeah, so you're saying the builder confidence based on the National Association of Home Builders, that one.
It's
Then that
well,
one,
yeah.
just to explain to viewers, I think it's at like 41. I'm just going by memory, right? 41 is the last one. They do a monthly survey. Anything below 50 means that builders are pessimistic regarding the housing market. Anything above 50 means that they're optimistic about building brand new single family houses.
It's one of those surveys that if you take the total number, you can miss the rate of change, because during the last expansion, when new home sales are slowly growing and single family permits were slowly growing, it was always below 50 for a long time. So kind of, I almost tell people, kind of ignore the 50 number. Look at the forward-looking data. If the forward-looking data in that survey starts to go, it's a positive for the housing market, positive for the builders.
So that'd be for permits and starts for single family houses.
And for the economy, for construction jobs as well.
Jobs as well. Okay, makes sense. All right. Very good. A couple more questions. I know we're running out of time here. What advice for home buyers do you have right now?
So I've had the same advice for home buyers for 25 years. Housing is the cost of shelter to your own capacity to own a debt. If you ever have to ask someone if you should buy a house, you're not ready to buy a house, because millions and millions of people buy homes every single year. They bought millions of homes in 2008. They bought millions of homes during COVID. Now that qualified mortgage is in here, you literally can't buy a house unless you qualify. So you have to get yourself into a mortgage person as soon as possible to figure out how much you can qualify for. But also remember, you know your finances better than anyone. You do not ask anybody on the internet. You do not ask anybody who doesn't know your own finances. You, as a grown adult, know your finances better than anyone. So get pre-qualified, and it's a comfort payment level. The benefit for housing in America is that it's a fixed debt cost and your wages rise every single year. In that light, you know your finances better than a bank does. Even if you qualify and you don't feel comfortable, don't pull the trigger, because you need to be able to sleep with that total housing payment each night and wake up with it every single morning, and go with yourself. Don't let anybody outside influence you. Get yourself pre-qualified. When that house is ready for you, you'll be like the millions and millions of people every single year that buy homes, and that'll be okay. And that's the best way to look at housing, without any kind of outside influence you could get from people that might not be looking in your best interest.
Yeah, that's a very good advice. And the other thing I tell people too is that just because the lender tells you qualify for $1 million property doesn't mean you should buy $1 million house. Look at your payment, look at your finances, your income coming in, and figure out what's best for you and your family.
About qualified mortgage is that nobody will be able to buy a house ever again that they can't qualify. I mean, literally everything gets checked up. And this is one of the reasons why I don't think housing could ever have a sales boom like we did from 2002 to 2005. That's the positive aspect of housing that I love so much. The credit markets are back to normal. It's very old vanilla lending. That's a positive. But everyone should realize your own finances, right? You are going to sleep with that payment every single day. So go with yourself. Trust yourself more than anyone else. And then you'll fall in line like everybody else every year for decades and decades and decades. Millions of people buy. I always have this thing. People rent, they date, they mate, they get married 3.5 years after marriage. They have kids, they buy homes, typically single family homes. That's how it's worked for decades. And now with the millennials, Gen Z, the Gen X, boomers, silent, they've all gone through these cycles, and they all kind of traditionally been the same, except people get married a little bit later in life. People buy homes a little bit later in life now. But we're all human beings. We're very predictable in that nature. And that's how the home buying process has worked really post-World War II, when you break the data versus every single generation.
Awesome. Last question for you. Predictions into 2025.
Okay, so as long as the 10-year yield and mortgage rates stay below kind of 6.5, housing demand should be stable. Prices will increase slowly. If there's a job loss recession that happens in 2025, housing actually disproportionately benefits, because mortgage rates will go lower and stay there longer. And you have to think about this. A lot of people say that Well, nobody's going to buy a house because everyone's unemployed. It's a stupid statement. There's over 162 million people unemployed. During COVID, we had 20 to 30 million people unemployed. We had 5 million under forbearance. Housing demand came right back within 6 weeks. Why? Because 133 million people were working with 3% rates. So in this context, if the data gets worse for the economy, housing benefits. If the economy starts to outperform again, rates stay higher for longer, it's very hard for existing home sales to grow in that environment. So the economy actually matters more for housing in regards to where mortgage rates will go. So to get more home sales, you probably need the data to stay a little bit softer and the Fed to pivot more. Mortgage spreads are coming down, but run the entire housing year where the 10-year yield is and mortgage rates are. Besides of that, credit markets look fine. We are at record low levels of sales. I am not joking when I say this. This is the third calendar year of the lowest home sales ever. It doesn't take much to move the needle, like in the 1980s. Rates went 2.5% lower. The builders have shown you the way. They can grow sales, but it does need a sub 6% mortgage market world. We're not there just yet. We're cracking at the door, but anything to push lower rates lower for longer, that's a benefit for housing just because disproportionately we have more buyers into the pool mix. The foreclosure crisis that everybody's talking about, just remember, minimum it takes 9 to 18 months to get a home that starts in a foreclosure into the supply. So since we're late in 2025, that cannot be, or late into 2024, it can't be a 2025 story. It has to be something in 2026 and 2027. So that's not going to be an issue for next year. But the economy, if it does soften, it actually disproportionately helps housing because it could push rates lower.
Yeah, it's wild because like inflation is like kind of under control right now, and it was also transitory like a couple of years ago. But anyways, like the direction in rates really have to do really what the Fed does, of course, but also the labor market. The labor market starts softening more, then rates will be coming down. So it's kind of a weird scenario in which, in order to see softness in labor, you need to see rates fall. So if you want to see rates fall, you need to see more people losing their jobs. Basically, it's kind of a weird dynamic.
It's one of those things where if the growth rate of labor actually slows more, that'll be the best case scenario. You never want to root for a job loss recession, but in this case, the Federal Reserve is still very tight with their policy. Over time, the mortgage spreads will get better. And with mortgage spreads getting better and an economy slowing down, you can get rates below 6% and stay there. But we're not there just yet. We're cracking at the door. And this is why I always say we track the 10-year yield in economic cycles religiously 24/7. I mean, I live and breathe this stuff. And we've kind of had the big rate move already before the rate cut. I mean, we had a 2% move lower in mortgage rates before any rate cut happens. That looks perfectly normal to me.
Mortgage rates.
Yeah. So yeah, that's what a lot of people think. Of course, rates have gone up since the Fed has cut. But going out in the future, you're going to need to see softer economic data. You're going to need to see the spreads get better to get mortgage rates to go lower. Outside of that, if that doesn't happen and the economy outperforms, home sales will probably stay low again, and the builders will outperform as they can push rates below 6%.
Yeah, well said. And for everyone watching today's video, the spread he means is the difference between the 10-year yield and the 30-year fixed mortgage rate, correct?
Yes. And historically, that's between 1.6 to 1.8%. It got to above 3% last year after the Silicon Valley banking crisis. It's moved down to about 2.4, 2%. So mortgage rates today, if I took the worst levels from last year, would be 75 basis points higher today. So of course, that's a huge difference. That means mortgage rates are near 7%. The market would not be behaving as it is today. But in this context, I do think that history has shown us that when the Fed starts cutting rates and gets more dovish, the spreads get better. And maybe it doesn't get back to 1.6 to 1.8, but if it just falls 0.5%, you're 5.5% or 5.75 mortgage rates today. If the 10-year yield falls, you get to low fives. So that's how you get mortgage rates lower for longer. Better spreads, dovish Fed, or the labor data getting softer. Those three things are the things that I'm focused on for 2025.
Yeah, and the spreads have been so wide between the 10-year and the 30-year fixed because of all the volatility in the bond market, correct? And now it's like kind of giving a little bit more of a normalcy. So without that, if we had like a more historical spread right now, then rates today would be probably in the mid fives right now. Is that right?
five and a quarter to 5.5% today, as of this morning, if it was there. So we're not quite anywhere back to normal, but we've made a big improvement from the worst levels of last year.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, awesome. Any last words? Anything else you want to say?
Always remember, economics done right should be boring. HousingWire, we try to make it as fun as possible. We track this stuff religiously. I know it's more fun listening to the doom porn people, but we're designed to teach people economics, so all of you could have the real-time information. And of course, this last week, Case-Shiller Index hit an all-time high. That's not shocking to us. But if you're going to make a personal choice to buy a home, listen to yourself. Trust yourself. Be careful out there, and get yourself to a bank as soon as possible to get yourself pre-qualified. And then trust me, the numbers will make the decisions for you, because millions and millions of people are going to buy homes again this year. We're going to have near 5 million total home sales. Last year, we had near 5 million total home sales. The peak levels for the last decade was near 6 million. So we're still having people buy and sell homes, but you as an individual have to be able to have the best information for yourself and your finances, rather than listen to people with nefarious agendas.
Yeah, well said. Thank you very much for being a guest. It's an honor to meet you in person. Love to have you back too, Logan.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, Logan. And everyone who want to check out his podcast, Logan, if you can send me a link to that, then I'll provide a link in the video description below for that as well. Everyone watching it, go ahead.
And if you guys really wanted to nerd out, my name, Logan Mohtashami on Instagram. I literally provide almost 24-hour video updates on all economic data, not just housing. And we call it the nerd family out there. So if you really want to bore yourself with nerdy information, that's another place to find me.
Well, you know where to find it. All right. Well, yeah, I follow you on Instagram too. I mean, fantastic, reels you make and everything. So really good content. So thank you very much for being a guest on the show. Really appreciate you, Logan. And everyone watching today's video, please like and subscribe and check out Logan's information in the link below. Hope you guys have an awesome day. I look forward to seeing you on the next video.